folks, this seems to be working. This is my first broadcast. I'm starting it myself, and I'm hoping that this is working. This is International Master John Watson, and this is the premiere of the show Ask the Master. This is my first time, so forgive any technical errors here. If you're here, you probably know that this is ICC TV, and you might want to bookmark this page for future reference. The main idea of this show is to ask questions about the chess world and anything about chess that you're interested in. If you want to ask questions in advance, we have the Twitter channel, which is hashtag AskIamWatson. So that's AskIamWatson. Anytime you feel like it, you can send a tweet to AskIamWatson anytime during the week or whenever you feel like doing it with a question for the show. I may have confused people with a tweet that I did send out, so to clarify, this is always a good place to leave your questions, and the ones that don't get answered in 1 week may well be answered in the next week. So an alternative is to ask a question right now. I see some people are using this. To ask a question right now live during the show, which you can do on this page, this ICC TV page in the chat. You do need to be registered in order to make comments. I see a lot of you already are, and if you aren't already registered, you can start to type in a comment in that chat box in the lower right-hand corner, and the program will prompt you to register. It's a very quick and easy registration process, and after that you can log on and use the live chat. And finally, we may get an ICC email that you can write to, not yet, but you can also right now send tells, not during the show, but in general during the week, send a tell to my ICC handle, which is John L. Watson. That's JOHNLWATSON. Okay, so what kind of questions might you want to ask? Anything really, but a few areas which I have expertise in are openings, chess openings, since I've taught them and I've played them and I've written books about them. Just about every opening over the years I think I've taught. Chess strategy, chess books and videos, because I've not only written books but I've reviewed them, and I've also viewed a lot of videos. And finally, well, not finally, but another thing I was thinking about is it's always interesting to talk about leading players, both contemporary ones and historical figures. So even though I'm not a great historical expert. So you can ask anything that comes to mind. Now, I should also say one of my goals for this show is to enlist some chess players, hopefully really top ones, and other chess personalities for interviews. So hopefully some of our shows might be interviews. And some of you might remember the interview show that I had on ICC between 2007 and 2011, which consisted of about 170 interviews over a few years, as you can see, with prominent figures in the chess world, and you can still hear these on the ICC video section. They're archived. So anyway, it'd be fun occasionally to bring someone on to talk about their chess experiences. So let's see how this all goes. I'm hoping for a mix of spontaneous questions by chat and also some that I will know about by advance. So the nice thing about the Twitter channel questions is that for those questions I have a chance to give a very thorough and considered reply, hopefully considered reply, for example, about which books to read or an opening question or something like that. So since right now I don't have, okay, I already have a question on the Twitter channel. I think I'll start out with a question from the Twitter channel. I already have one on the chat. So let me start with that. Okay, Zephyr asks, this is from the Twitter channel, do you follow the professional scene? If so, who do you think can challenge Carlsen to become world champion? Who is overrated? And I don't think I'll answer the who is overrated part because I'll alienate people on the show. Besides, these players. This is also one of these wonderful speculative questions that everybody loves to talk about. For example, greatest players of all time. And it's most fun to have at least two people arguing about it. So let me bring into the conversation someone who's really close to the debate and is a much better person to assess it, and that's Anish Giri, because by coincidence, this young phenom that you've probably heard of has written a new and pretty short book for New in Chess called After Magnus, and it's subtitled Who Can Dethrone the World Chess Champion? So it's a fun read, and partly because of the very wacky illustrative games that Geary chooses and annotates. So he has a great style, which you may have seen in New in Chess, great annotating style. Anyway, he talks about 10 players in his Dethroned Magnus category, and the selection is pretty interesting. It's a little odd. For example, the introduction says the selection criteria included the fact that it would help if a player was young, quote, under or around 20, unquote, and that therefore Vladimir Kramnik, for example, and Lev Aronian weren't included. But then Geary also includes 45, and seems a little unlikely, at least to me, to beat Carlsen in a third match, even if you get that far. So it's a little strange, but I think he's just having fun with the whole concept. He also includes Grishuk, who is 31 and only 1 year younger than Aronian, I believe. And there's no mention of Palov, who's currently number 4 in the world in live ratings at number 40. But anyway, the list is revealing. Here's the list: Wai Yi, Richard Kapoor, Yu Yang Yi, Dean Carl, and Vichy Anand. I'll get back to that, but what's the biggest omission by far? Obviously, Geary himself, who is appropriately modest. He's currently ranked number 5 in the world, and at 21 years old, he's also the youngest in the top 10, so he's clearly a candidate to dethrone Magnus. And in fact, he, Wesley So, and Yu Yang Yi are all 21, and when you include the amazing Wai Yi, who is 16 and ranked number 20 in the world, they're age 21 or below the top 65. So think of it as a young person's game, but apparently 21 younger is a bit too young, except with a few suggestions. Oh, okay. I'm having problems with the headset here, I'm told. And yes, beep, beep, beep. A robot or said. Now let me think. Maybe I can simply just, well, hopefully it's the headset and nothing else around. Give me a second. Okay, I warned about technical problems. Why don't you you folks keep chatting to me if there are still extra problems with the headset. And as the chat says, we're trying to fix this now. I'm sort of adjusting my microphone and hoping that that helps a little bit, hoping that that helps. And as you probably saw, I plugged in an exterior connection. How is that going now? Maybe someone can give me a quick chat. Still issues. Well, okay. Okay, well, I'll just continue and hopefully just keep warning me if it's getting worse. We'll give it a whirl for now, and I just apologize about that. We actually tested it before and it seemed to be okay, so that's just the way the world is, I guess. So anyway, it's not a sure thing, but I think somebody will. Well, Geary obviously is a candidate. He even jumped over 2,800 at some point, so he's an obvious candidate. I do think someone will probably come along and at least temporarily take the title away from Carlsen within the next 10 to 15 years, especially if the format moves even in a small way towards what Carlsen is suggesting in terms of having them more often and having them be more competitive in terms of qualification, including Carlsen himself. And that's because the World Championship always has a certain element of sort of randomness, in the sense that it depends on who's in top form and what are the stylistic differences. You know, somebody like Kramnik fit very well with Kasparov, for example, whether players are equally motivated. You know, Carlsen might simply suffer some sort of burnout if he's feels he's achieved everything already and just simply can't keep his motivation up. And there are things like health. So personally, I can see one of the older players sneaking through to the candidates, possibly, but not beating Carlsen. So it probably will be one of Geary's younger players, or he himself, or even some phenomenon we haven't seen yet, because Wai Li is 16. He's got to be a very strong candidate at this point, since he's so highly rated. And he just pretty much came from nowhere. So that happens or some Carlsen, who just pops up and becomes an obvious world championship candidate. So I can't really name a specific person that I think will pass. It's just too random. It's too difficult. And the problem with very young players is it takes time to figure out what their strengths are, and really even how tough they are in match play, which is of course very difficult to figure out. So that's a sort of partial answer or something to that question. Let me take a quick look at the channel. Okay. Wow, quite a few questions. I should check and see what would be fairly simple to do here. Now this question about the bishop g5 lines in the Najdorf with a trick, some sort of play with knight takes e4, is I could do that spontaneously, but I have a funny feeling that that would be better asked as a Twitter question because I'd have a little time to look at it and not make a complete fool of myself. Also just give you a more accurate answer. Good question though. I like questions like that, sort of specific lines and what to do about them. Then what to do if my opponent plays the bird opening. Well, you know, we could say something about that. Okay, so let me quickly go to the board. And the bird opening is this, for those that don't know about it, f4. And of course you can play anything. The sort of the traditional answer is just to go there. Something I used to do sometimes, and you may not be to your taste or fit other openings that you play, but I used to play the move d6 at some point, maybe right away or maybe next, or maybe even c5. But the point is I would avoid playing d5, because when you play d5, you're kind of doing what White expects and is used to, which is you're allowing him to develop the bishop quickly, get castled, and put pressure on the e5 square. So sometimes it frustrates bird players to play moves like this, and when they do their normal setup, they might also go g3, by the way, but at some point, whatever they do, you're going to play this move d6 instead of d5, and they can't play knight e5. Most bird players are not terribly strong, exceptions of course, but that they really are dependent on one plan a lot of times. They also like to play b3 sometimes. There's also a reverse Leningrad variation. You can do the same thing. You can play an early d6. So you can play c5 on the first move, you can play g6, you can even play d6 right away, but that allows them more leeway. So you might want to play then some sort of Sicilian line, for example. So in a way you have to just work out your own move order, but that's a little trick you can use to frustrate people who play 1f4, in my opinion. Okay, so let's just keep moving down here. That's a great question because it's pretty easy for me not to go on and on and on about it. This is a great comment here. I usually get my gun and shoot the bird. Fantastic. Okay, then we have, let me see. What are the 3 best openings to learn about when you're 900 to 1000? I missed the exact question there, but that was one of the questions. To learn to start out with, well, I think everybody thinks you should learn e4. I'll go along with that. I don't want to be original, make some original comment, because you get to learn, it's a move that gets out 2 pieces right at once, you develop quickly, you take over the center. It's a little less sophisticated than d4. I don't think it really leads to more attacking games once you're a very sophisticated player. I think d4 can lead to just as strong attacking games. But I think that you'll find that it's good, it's good for just learning how to get your pieces out quickly and getting castled quickly. And of course I could go into specifics there. As far as black, same thing. You can learn how to play e5. You can learn, if you want to learn classically, you can play the Queen's Gambit. Declined, for example, is a very solid way of playing. I hate to say these are traditional suggestions, but I don't want to try to be fancy. I think as far as instructive openings, maybe when you're a little bit higher than 900 or 1100, but even then you could start with them. I think 2 of the most instructive openings in the world are the King's Indian defense, and that's where you play these moves, because it leads to just such amazing structures and sort of predictable structures that teach you a lot about a lot of other openings too. It's a little hard to describe, but if you study it, you'll find that out. And against e4, for example, Well, of course, I tend to like the French defense, but I also think it's very instructive because it's sort of a fixed structure that you can learn a lot of things. Usually white at some point is going to play e5, if not now, the next move or a move afterwards, or very often white will play e5. And that's a structure that's well worth learning. So that's a very superficial answer, but I think we want to get to other questions. Okay, in play the French, if white goes knight c3, the McCutcheon variation was advised. My main problem is if I go with the main line g4, I have to learn all kinds of lines. Oh, I see, these are separate questions. Wow, a lot of questions really quickly here, so let me see. Okay, so that was just a comment. He was surprised that McCutcheon was advised. Well, in the edition before that, I hate to try and sell you two editions, but you can probably get a cheap copy. First of all, you should know what the McCutcheon is. McCutcheon is that after white plays here, black has some choices. He can play the Rubinstein variation like that. And in the first edition, I suggested instead of playing knight d7, which is really the Rubinstein, I suggested playing this way. And then actually taking back with the bishop. But it's also quite fun to take back with the pawns. A lot of options in the French. There's always a lot of things to do. Morozevich used to play this, and a lot of top players have played this. The idea is to fiend shadow this bishop and play f5. Get the bishop pair and maybe even use the G file. And you can look that up, but it's a very fun line. It's a line I'd like to play myself, actually. If you don't want to give up the center, this is called surrendering the center, you can also play the classical variation, which is suggested in Ogar and Tierless's book, for example. The main line goes like this, and you use traditional chess French themes of attacking the center with that move, attacking the center with these kinds of moves. So that's certainly a good option. But the question was about the McCutcheon, and since I'd already suggested this capture line before, I decided to try something different. It's very popular, it's very sharp. It's related to the Winnower variation, the Winnower being knight c3, bishop b4. So in a way it kind of goes with the ideas of the book, since the Winnower is the main suggestion, one of the two main suggestions in the main line. And I spent three editions of not recommending the McCutcheon, so you're right to be surprised in a sense, but I think I like to give different lines in every edition, because I think the French is very flexible and there are a lot of sound lines. So that's sort of an explanation of why I did that. Now how am I going to scroll down on this screen here? Somehow I'm not able to scroll down on this screen. Why is that? Give me 1 second. Oh, I see. There's the bar. Yeah, okay, the English attack question's a little bit complicated. Again, it would probably be better in a Twitter. I have strong opinions about that, actually, but I think it'd be hard to answer quickly. Maybe I'll get back to one of the Twitter questions now. I think there are a couple others here. Keep sending chat questions, and I'll get back to them. Okay. Oh, wait, here's an interesting one with a contribution by Jim Tarshan, who's a Grandmaster, an incredibly strong Grandmaster. When you go for the London system with d4, d5, why is bishop f4 more accurate than knight f3? Let's hit that one first. That's actually a pretty simple. It isn't necessarily more accurate. It's just preferred by some people. Actually, I think you could claim knight f3 is just as accurate as bishop f4. But the idea of bishop f4 is that if you play knight f3, this move is quite sound. I used to play this move as black. I think a lot of good players do. It's already black's taking some sort of initiative in the center. His queen can come out early sometimes. If you play bishop f4 soon, you're going to get hit with queen b6, for example, attacking the b pawn. So people are trying to avoid that. And you might say, well, how does this avoid that? Well, one thing is some players are afraid of this gambit. Now, you'll notice this is an Albin Countergambit, but white has an extra tempo. And the Albin Countergambit is pretty dangerous anyway, so that if black plays the most natural move here, white plays here, and white's gained an extra tempo on the Albin. And there are players who don't want to allow this. I think black's okay here. I talk about this in a couple different books. For example, the Taming the Wild Chess Openings, the recent book we put out, Eric Schiller and I, we talk about this. I think black's okay here, but it's difficult. White's got a big lead in development. He goes like this. He maybe puts his queen here. That's a tricky little way to play. And castles queenside, and all of a sudden there's all kinds of ideas with f3, breaking open all kinds of lines for the sake of just one pawn. So that's a quick answer. There are some other finesses with bishop f4 instead of knight f3, but they aren't very important. Okay, let's see what else we have here. These are fun questions. I have, that's an idea, queen f3, so that's probably with reference to an earlier question. Well, that's the English attack question with a Scheveningen with g4 right away. Is it a Scheveningen? Or a Najdorf with g4? Well, you can't play g4 then, against e6. Well, okay, let me see if I can figure this out. Now I'm going to probably make a complete fool of myself, because for one thing, I'm not sure if I understand the question completely. We're talking about a Najdorf with e6, but it says 5 e6, and the fifth move is, of course, a6. So maybe we're talking about e6, but then this is simply the Keres attack. So I think I'm misunderstanding the question. Let me quickly move over there and see what I can get. You'll want to play something. Okay, let me get back to the original question. Okay, I play bishop g5 lines against the Najdorf. What do you recommend? Wow. You're going to have to get good at scrolling up and down. There's a lot of comments here. What do you recommend? For me, against the Scheveningen move order, I was once tricked into a theoretically drawn variation. Oh, I see. So you were in a Scheveningen position, and you played there, but you weren't happy with it, because black has saved. That's true. It's not as good a move here, because it's just easier for black to get his pieces out and simplify. The bishop isn't quite as well placed as it is in a Najdorf. So the question is, what about g4? Well, g4 is the Keres line, and that's quite good. And then someone mentions playing queen f3 next. And Jim Tarjan about that says, and I'm scrolling down again, he says, yeah, oh, Jim Tarjan wants to play g4. That's a good idea. It's the main line, the Keres. It's the main reason people don't play it. One of the main reasons people avoid the Scheveningen, because they're scared of the Keres attack, at least in the old days. There are good answers, though, if you look at any book. So what else? Oh, with queen f3 as a sideline of the bishop g5 lines. Of the bishop g5 Najdorf. Okay, so you could play queen f3 in conjunction with bishop g5. In fact, that's kind of fun. In other words, if black played here, for example, which he might not, unfortunately, white can play there and castle queenside early and maybe follow it up with this kind of attack. There's some cute ideas that if a knight comes there, the queen can come back there, and then f4 comes. You can also, yeah, you can play queen f3 right away against the Najdorf too as a fun move. That's recommended in one of the Dangerous Weapons books. For example, this is actually quite fun, this move, and I had one of my students playing it for a while. And you know, there are answers to all these things, but they'll surprise your opponents. And again, one of the ideas is that when he plays a move like this, you can do this, and the other idea is bishop g5 and castling queenside really rapidly. So it's all kinds of things to think about. Chess is wonderful. There's just so many things you can do. Let me keep going once more, and then I'll answer another one of the Twitter questions. State of correspondence chess, what a wonderful question. Okay, let me go back to the Twitter questions for a second. Unfortunately, the Twitter questions require long answers, but I think they're kind of interesting anyway. Tessa asked, do you have a highly recommended book for training planning skill? I mean a deep one, not just about center type and pawn structure. So the short answer is no, I'm afraid, because there are some books related to planning I can give you the titles of, but I have some problems thinking that they're really that helpful. But first, let me talk about structures, which you mentioned. I'm not sure there's anything deeper than truly understanding pawn structures and where the pieces go in different structures and what to do in them and where the pawn breaks are. Because what it means for each structure in hundreds of different contexts depends on such small things. So you really get a feel for exactly what order of moves to play in, where your pieces should go. And it's something grandmasters have a huge set or database of knowledge and experience about. And is, in my opinion, it's a deeper process than any verbal plannings about, or any verbal sort of talks or guidelines about planning or exercises about how to plan, because those are very vague and very difficult to really put into to give you specific chess knowledge. So once you start to learn the nuances of certain structures, you'll find it much easier to grasp and play a whole bunch of structures that you've never seen before. So it's the best study that I know of, so I kind of disagree with you. Well, no, I don't disagree with you, but I wouldn't denigrate center types and pawn structures. But that's all an aside, and it's not really a fair answer. So, and it's a good question. So I went to my collection of books on training and positional play and strategic play, and I'm not sure if there really is a good book that actually shows you how to plan, but there are certainly books that address the subject, and they mostly proceed from specific games and positions. So I try to discuss, these books try to discuss how to think in particular positions usually, and they're training exercises are about particular positions, and usually they have hindsight. The analysis has some sort of hindsight. So in these books, it's funny how many examples require a double exclamation point move or a very strong move right from the start, and then how that brilliant plan in turn requires or depends upon some lengthy analysis, lengthy lines, and some very subtle assessments at the end of the lines. And they're really completely unrealistic to try. They're good. They're wonderful to play over. They teach you a lot about chess, but I don't think they help you plan very much because you're not only not going to get that position, but you're not going to have the tools to decide on all of that. Now, with luck, the author will discuss his or her own thoughts about how to play, which can be very inspiring, but not necessarily easy to incorporate into your own thought process. So, as I say, you can learn things, but I don't know about getting general insight into the planning process in general. And this also applies to my own books, by the way, I should say, on strategy. I think you can learn a lot about chess and how it's played, but probably not how to plan in any really useful or detailed way. So I recommend games collections as the closest thing to seeing how grandmasters themselves think. And of the training and instructional books, many people swear by Jeremy Silman's books, Reassess Your Chess and The Amateur's Minds. Jakob Ogor has books on positional and strategic chess, which have many training examples. So it's good for training, but really little explanation of actual planning. The recent Boris Gelfand book, Positional Decision Making in Chess, is a good example of some of the points I'm making. It's a wonderful and instructive book, but as far as planning, he emphasizes that the major planning decisions usually need to be made quickly without deep thought and using intuition. And of course that intuition is built up and informed by years of experience. So he says that you'll need your time later anyway in a position because that's where a mistake can mean a disaster. You'll need it in a later position of the game, a more critical position, because that's where a mistake can mean a disaster, or you might have something decisively winning. So basically he wants you to make these moves fairly quickly, these sort of deep planning moves. And he also refers to the fact that he only understands the general features of a position after a game and after deep analysis, and that's a quote. So even when he does explicitly talk about a move where he spent a long time towards finding a plan, it's hard to translate what he's doing into a specific advice. So here's a typical quote I got from his book. Quote from Gelfand. So at this moment I thought for 11 minutes, and I believe I found a good idea, which in retrospect seems logical. So 11 minutes is a lot for early in the game. Anyway, continuing the quote, if black is playing with only a few pieces, it makes sense to exchange them, so he's left only with undeveloped pieces. How simple, right? This is how I can explain it now, he says. But during a game, I just look for the best solution. It is a far more concrete process. This does not mean that the understanding is not important, only that it is more subconscious. So even at that level where he's saying, he's not quite sure why he's coming up. He's not making a systematic planning effort. He's using his intuition and his subconscious. And there are a lot of other books. There are books with systematic methods for choosing a move. For example, the recent book, Per Ostman, Your Best Move, A Structure to Point to Move Selection in Chess. But it has its own problems, and in particular, I would say that there are too many hands. You have a long list every move you made of things to think about, and it's just simply not realistic to do that. And also he sort of dodges the question of planning to some extent. He just wants you to go through this thinking process. So in a way he's admitting that a lot of planning is intuitive. I think he even says that at some point. Okay, so that's something we can consider, and let's go back here. With all due respect, why aren't you a grandmaster? Is it one of your goals? Yeah, I got this question on Twitter too. I can make all kinds of excuses. I think the two best excuses I have are A, it was difficult in my time to play a lot of tournaments without going to Europe that had actual norm possibilities. And the other thing is that once I became an IM, I did lose motivation. And I wasn't really interested in becoming a Grandmaster. I would have loved to be one, but I wasn't that interested because I was just going into electrical engineering. So I was going to school. I kept writing books, oddly enough, chess books, a little bit more slowly because it was difficult. It was an engineering degree. And then I went into engineering and didn't get back to it. Now, did I have enough talent or knowledge, or maybe the over-the-board nerve, I think is important in my case, to become a Grandmaster? I wouldn't really claim that I did. I like to think I might have been able to. If I did become one, I'd probably become a pretty weak Grandmaster. I do think it's easier nowadays to become a Grandmaster. You might get some argument about that, but there's just so many more opportunities. There's so many more ways to do it, and there's so much more. Well, there are ways of really devoting yourself to it and getting just tons of opportunities and practice against strong players. And there's online. There's more knowledge and there's more online play. But I think I have also some fundamental problems in terms of competitiveness and ambition. I got in a lot of time trouble. That didn't help. And I warn everybody against time trouble. So, you know, a mixed answer. I think I could maybe have done it, but I did have some defects in my play, basically. And also, right at the time when I probably would have gone for it, because I just got my IM title, I basically quit chess, or almost quit it completely, and even had a couple bad results right as I was quitting. So I think that gave me even more disincentive, since I'm kind of a coward and I don't like bad results. Okay, so that's a quick answer. It's kind of a funny question. What can I do with the Borg 1.G5? That's in our book, Taming the Wild Chess Openings, by the way. And I think I'll kind of scroll down and see if there's something else down there. The Borg, by the way, is, and I can hardly remember it, it's G5, but I can't remember whether it's just against E4 or just against D4. I think that's the Borg. The amazing thing is we wrote about this in our book, and I think Eric took this section, and I can't remember quite what we suggested. I think it's pretty obvious. You can play D4 and get your pieces out quickly and centralize. I could even give a more specific answer to that question next week. That might be interesting. But I think I'll cop out on that one for now. Develop quickly and hold on to your own pieces. And yeah, there's an idea, by the way, in this opening. Meyer used to play this opening by transposition, where black tries to play this move and this move. And you can even give up that. You can give up that pawn. For example, here. You can play here with ideas of taking, and bishop takes b2 is indirectly threatened, and queen a5 check or queen b6 is an idea. And I actually have a couple of books where I talk about that. And I think white is better here, but you can also just cop out on the whole thing by playing more slowly if you want to. You can play knight f. You can play knight c3s, c3s, things like that. Sorry not to give a little better answer to that question. Okay, you wrote about a book about strategy after Nimzo-Indian. Yes, this was in Twitter also. Give me a little second here. I'm going to answer the question about Nimzo-Indian, which was in the Twitter feed. I'd like to talk about Nimzo-Indian. Let's just see what other, that's from John Hartman, by the way, that question. And let me quickly see what some other things people have said. Okay, I hope I'm not skipping anybody. It's a really important thing. Let me talk about that Nimzo-Indian question. Just see what I've got here. The best chance for white to get an advantage against the Nimzo-Indian. I don't really think you can get an advantage against the Nimzo-Indian, but at least objectively, as in so many openings. But let me talk about the Nimzo-Indian in general. It is a very general question. Maybe I'd give a very specific answer if I had a specific line or variation to talk about. But let me just mention a few things about it. First of all, some people may not even know what the Nimzo-Indian is. I see, for example, if we have a 900 or 1,000 player, they might want to know a little basic things. That's the Nimzo-Indian. And it used to be the major reason that people didn't play d4. D4 was very, very popular, and then Karpov and almost everybody on the top started playing the Nimzo-Indian. And really, that was the point where e4 started taking over again, the first move, e4. So the question is, when d4 came back again, e4 sort of in a way ran into a lot of problems, but one of them was just e5. The last 10 to 15 years, e5 has been so solid and so difficult, and you probably are all aware of things like the Berlin defense, but there are actually a lot of other e5 things that are that cause a lot of difficulties. So, so for example, this kind of thing. This is the Berlin defense, and turns out that almost everybody in the world now plays this as black, and because at the top, at least top players do, because they're satisfied with the draw as black, and whites have a hard time getting by that. So maybe white plays this move instead a lot of times, and that's fairly slow. This has frustrated white a lot, and so have a bunch of other defenses to the Ruy Lopez, and to the other e4 or e5 openings just don't seem to really quite cut it in terms of getting advantage. So people are back to playing d4, and what are they doing about the Nimzo? Well, one thing to remember is that you can play this move, and an awful lot of top players play that move. Very, very many top players. And that can lead to the Queen's Gambit decline, for example, which players are more willing to play against than the Nimzo-Indian. Or the, and by the way, this you can play a Caro-Kann against, which is extremely popular and very safe. Kramnik made it popular, but everybody seems to play it now. A safe and good line against the Queen's Gambit. Black can play the Bogo Indian, but here you can, well, there's a variety of things you can do. You don't have to put a knight here and let double pawns happen. You can play this kind of thing, or knight d2. Or black can play the Queen's Indian, for example, and that's well known, but white has quite a few ways to at least try to get an advantage against that. So knight f3 is a big answer. Now, knight c3 has advantages, and one of them is that if black plays here now, we have an exchange variation of the Queen's Gambit, whereas if you play knight f3, it turns out the exchange variation isn't as good. Maybe I won't go into the details of that, but it turns out that this move is not very impressive. So knight c3 is still played a lot, and because of that and several other reasons. But what about the Nimzo? Well, I think people jump around a lot against the Nimzo, and there's all kinds of things that you can play as a lower player which are not refutations of the Nimzo, and they aren't really the best line, which was the question. So I'm avoiding the question to some extent, but you might want to know about them. And just for example, there's the Leningrad. That hasn't been played much recently, but well, it's still played. It's still played by very strong players. I know. And in the old days, people like Timon, Yermolinsky, who's on ICC all the time, used to play the Leningrad quite a lot. It's fun. It's aggressive. And it's sound. It's not going to lose the game by force or anything. And then you have, of course, this sort of neutralish looking move. And then if black castles, maybe now bishop g5. Definitely an attacking line. You want to just aim your pieces at the king. And you might want to take over the center. You might want to get e4 in. It's a fun line. You want to look these lines up, obviously. But I just want to show you what's available. On a move like this, Kasparov, for example, played this. A lot of other players played it. Just fianchettoing, getting your pieces out quickly and trying to take over the center. Again, it's not maybe a lifetime system, but it's certainly worth thinking about. And but that leaves, and I'm sure oh well, there's the Samish, which is actually fun, especially all the way up to 2200 or something. And top grandmasters still use it from time to time. Milov used it, Yusupov used to use it, and I think other players too. A variation of that, which is a little more realistic and played a lot more right now, a little more realistic in terms of objectively not getting in danger. I think a3 is perfectly sound. But, and the idea, by the way, there is that you're going to take over the center. You've lost a whole tempo by playing a3 because he wants doubled pawns. But you can just start making moves like this, bring your bishop out, bring your knight up to e2, and just start expanding, f4, and just start trying to attack. And it's amazing how poorly Nimzo-Indian players sometimes play if they didn't grow up looking at the Samish, which few people do anymore. A variant of that is this, with the idea of playing e4 immediately, and then you'll often play for a Samish kind of position here, and black can either retreat at this point or you can get a Samish kind of position, which white might end up preferring to the normal Samish. Again, you have to look this sort of thing up. I'm not really answering the question. But I wanted to give some sort of overview there of what's going on in the Nimzo-Indian and what some of the options are. So, and there are other things you can do. There are queen b3 ideas after knight f3, and like Yasser Serouin used to play, and it goes on. And that's what's fun, is you can jump around from system to system. Now, the most ambitious move, which was the most popular for quite a while among top players, is that move. Unfortunately, one problem with this is you're developing your queen early, and black tends to get a big lead, or a lead in development, and that means he has attacking chances. Also, white's d-pawn is no longer protected. So after a move like this, there's threats to take and take here, or maybe knight c6 can come, and c5 it directly attacks the d-pawn also. So what ends up happening in these positions, even after castles, is that black tends to get a lead in development and has a lot of attacking chances. It can easily become very sharp, especially the c5 and d5 lines. And the theory of these lines is just filled with extremely complicated and tactical variations that really have to be memorized, unfortunately, because white can easily succumb to some sort of counterattack that black has. And there's nothing wrong with that. And the counterattack can have to do with moves like b5 and d4 after d5 and taking d4, maybe even giving up a pawn. There's all kinds of very radical things that you can do. Even e5 can be played in a lot of lines, just opening up positions like crazy before white gets sort of settled. So that's a problem. You have to memorize a line. Now there's nothing wrong with that, but it takes a real commitment to study, and you also have to maybe keep up with the lines a little bit. And also, maybe one last thing is that over recent years we've been finding these fairly simple lines that black has been played that tend to apparently not give white any advantage. So I think that's made queen c2 slightly less popular, although it still, of course, is played all the time. But on a practical level for a lower player, I just don't think it's the most realistic line. So what I recommend in my book is this simple move, this traditional move, which has been played more than any other move over the years. It's a positional move. It doesn't preclude you having any attacking prospects. You can still aim at the king side. You know, this kind of move, get castled quickly and expand in the center. So it's got normal chess points, and there's still a lot of, I guess the point is it's hard to stand worse because it's very solid. So even if you make some sort of mistake, some sort of inaccuracy, you won't be punished too badly. You aren't going to get checkmated, and that's a nice thing. Now, a really good book is Ivan Sokolov's book, The Strategic Nimzo-Indian, A Complete Guide to the Rubinstein Variation, which is a deep and wonderful book. And at the risk of pushing my own books, I give a complete 4E3 repertoire in my book, A Strategic Chess Opening Repertoire for White. So I hope that sort of answers the question. I don't know what the best line is, but I would recommend 4E3. Yeah, I think I also got this question in Twitter. Okay, we've slowed down with the questions probably because I've skipped a few. Oh no, we haven't, excuse me. The creepy crawly, yes we did. We talked about the creepy crawly, that's A3, and yeah, it's called Taming the Wild Chess Openings, this book. So we talk about everything from crazy stuff like that. We talk about this is the first move. We actually have separate sections on things like this is first moves, there, whoops, there. And then we get more and more normal. We have a long section on this. We have a fairly long section on this. And we move more and more towards sort of conventional gambits. A lot of gambits, the Philidor Countergambit, that kind of thing. And then we also have a section in the Cochrane Gambit, for example. You know, this sort of, well, there's actually hundreds of openings in this book, so it's very hard to describe. But just for example, this kind of thing we give a lot of detail on. Crazy things, wild things. But we also decided, because it's sort of student-based on all our years of teaching, so we try to give a lot of calm lines. Students are always asking, what do you do about the Trompovsky? Or what, because they consider those things irregular. Maybe not wild, but irregular. We call those the good openings, as opposed to the bad and ugly openings. Or just passive things like the Kali, just drive them crazy, this kind of thing. Or the same thing with the King's Indian structure, some sort of Kali idea. And then G6 and all that. And people wonder what to do against these things. So we give solutions like that. And we give the Smith-Morra Gambit, for example, for white. We give a very, for black, an original sort of solution that involves this move, which I think is holding up very well. We first suggested it about 30 years ago, and nobody seems to have a good answer to it. And yet it's not played much. And some books don't mention it. I falsely stated that there was a book that didn't mention it that in fact did, but nobody gives very good analysis of it. And I think it's really completely sound. A lot of slower lines. We give a lot of sort of slow lines that people don't like to play against, things that our students ask us all the time about. So mostly it's wild, crazy stuff and gambits, but then there's also a very solid sort of sophisticated line of section for lines that even professionals play. Okay, oh, b4. Oh, well, I give a long thing. I've talked about b4 for many years. I simply love just taking the pawn and then developing incredibly quickly. This is one of those development things. I've won a lot of games just by playing sort of normal moves. Rook e8, knight c6. One of the main lines, and you can play this reversed also, Kramnik did against Carlsen, had the white side of this position, you can play moves like c5 and knight c6. And then a lot of times when the bishop comes back here, you play bishop here and here. I give a lot of detail. There's also all kinds of fun stuff that involves sacrificial kind of play. I mean, something like this, where you're suddenly playing for attacks with here, and maybe even just taking this pawn at some point. It's a little obscure. I'd have to show you the exact lines, but there's a lot of fun tactical lines. You can see what's happening here. Black's getting a big lead in development. So with a big lead in development, you can think about crashing through with various sacrifices. White has a central majority, but it's extremely hard to use. So I'd love to go on and on about b4, but I'm not sure how much general interest there is. There's all kinds of fun stuff. So yeah, and someone's suggesting that here. Scheveningen is mentioning Scheveningen is mentioning that you can play the line I just showed. Let me see now. Sorry. Tal. F6 now. I should have become a Grandmaster. Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100%. Keep saying things like that and you'll get favorable mention. Why don't you like Dasher? Yeah, somebody who knows me. That's a student, by the way. And I think it's just us older folks, we just hate new things. As an engineer, I had to learn new software every 2 weeks, it seemed like, and I got more and more irritated. They just kept bringing in new programs to do the same thing. So I have a long history of not liking these things. But I do have other objections. I do things in Blitzen that I can't seem to find out how to do in Dasher. Okay. Where are we here? What's the big kerfluffle about Naka's recent two-handed castling? Why does one move that way to gain 0.2 seconds? Yes, I think he's just gotten used to it on ICC, well, not on ICC, but in his 1-minute games. Remember, he plays bullet games, so 0.2 seconds is a lot of time. The question is from why does one move that way to gain 0.2 seconds in a blitz game on move 5? That seems like an odd thing to do, but then why do some folks, including one Russian site, get so vituperative towards Naka for having done such a thing? Well, of course, chess players can be notoriously neurotic, and Nepomniachtchi, who lost the game, of course, had lost to the game and was irritated, just because you get irritated when you lose games. I think it's pretty trivial. It is a rule that you're not supposed to. And what he's talking about is making the move castling. I obviously can't show it on the screen, but by picking up the king and the rook with two different hands and sort of shifting them into castling position, which you can imagine is faster than picking up the king, putting it on g8 in this case is black, and putting the rook on f8. And so in Nakamura, who's the best bullet player in the world, that's a 1-minute game. He actually does gain time doing that, and he's played so many of these, not just online, but I've seen him play it on, just at tournaments, just for fun, that he's gotten used to doing that, and he'll have to correct that because, in fact, it is illegal. Although I guess it's a little bit obscure if you move them both at exactly the same time. I'm not sure. But you're still using two hands. I don't think you're supposed to do that. So technically, if someone called it immediately, which this player didn't, and called over a referee or something, it might get a favorable ruling, probably a time penalty. So I don't think Nakamura did it to gain time in this particular situation. It's just that he has the habit of gaining time in these really rapid games. Why in the Caro-Kann are people not afraid of the Stom variation with h4 and then g4 to trap the bishop on h7? Well, maybe they should be afraid. That's what Leko lost to Kramnik in the last game. All he had to do was draw against Kramnik in the last game of the World Championship, or he would have been world champion. And Kramnik played this move. One of my students played this move for years and years and years. The question is, why isn't black afraid of the move g4 followed by h5? For example, here has this problem of here, here, here. That's kind of what he's asking. And then the bishop can get trapped. And if you try to stop that, then maybe you're weakening your king side. So what Leko did, I believe, I'm trying to remember, did he play? He played the bishop back here. Maybe he played c5. It's terrible, I can't remember this. But what he did was he ended up playing the bishop back to d7 and then just developing with e6 and developing normally. No, what was his first move? But you can also prevent that threat and go back on the same diagonal by playing h6. I always thought the best move was h5, and I think people have come around to that idea. I had a student many years ago that we played the Caro-Kann, and we thought h5 was the best move. A long time ago, it was thought that white might end up, that black might end up having some trouble because that pawn could be hanging in some lines. But then black gets these big counterattacks going with c5, and just, in fact, that's black's plan now. It's just e6 and c5 and attack the center. So it's a complicated question, but I would recommend h5, and I think that's pretty much knocked h4 out from being a mainstream move. h6 gives white a lot of space, and space is very valuable. There's some old Tal games where he actually played f4 and just sort of pushed all his pawns up, and they're wonderful games. Black castled queenside and white pushed with f5, and I think they're actually pretty promising for white. I saw the other day that someone even played the same plan 40 years later and did very well with it. Just threw all the pawns at black. Okay, I hope that has some kind of answer to that question. People get mad. Here's an answer to one of the questions from Chess at 3. By the way, Captain K12 loves Dasher. People get bad because if you touch the rook before the king, then you technically aren't allowed to castle. You have to touch the king first. Yeah, and that's it's not an illegal move. It's a move executed improperly. Penalty up to the arbiter, presumably. Yes, that's a good correction. Okay, Naka touches the king first. It's not a question about touching the rook first. Well, someone claimed he touched them both simultaneously. I know, I saw that claim. That may not be true. Apparently it's not. But in that case, we're getting kind of delicate about the whole question. But anyway, he's saying if the rook was touched first, of course the rook would have to move if it could. Okay, I think there's a quote that stated that, where Tal stated that as black, he played the Sicilian for a draw, the Caro for a win. Yeah, Tal was one of the great fun players of all times, and there's all sorts of wonderful quotes. I have no idea what he's talking about, but I don't think he even played the Caro that much. But and he won enough Sicilians that we'll be a little skeptical of that claim, but it's a fun quote. Many players do play the Caro for a win, though. They just want to get their pieces out, get some activity, and it's going to be a double-edged game, and they're happy. It doesn't matter if you get an advantage or even if you get an attack, because you can develop an attack later. So that's certainly a legitimate idea about the Caro-Kann, by the way. But of course you can play the Sicilian for a win too, as we know. Okay, I could get back to one more of these Twitter questions. Oh, we've been on quite a while. I think I'll finish with one more Twitter question, and then we will actually, I guess because we've been on enough time now, this might be a good time to stop. Maybe one more chat question, because the Twitter questions require quite long answers, unfortunately. Let me just look and see what I skipped, because I skipped quite a few things. In your book with Schiller, Albin Countergambit was a snake. We discussed the snake. The snake is one of these Benonis with it's just a normal looking modern Benoni, except that black makes the move bishop d6 instead of d6 and bringing the bishop to g7. It's a fun line. You have to know what you're doing. One of the critical lines that no one ever plays. Usually white just develops and gets some advantage, and it's probably the best way to do it. Make moves like this. Just develop, get your pieces out, and you tend to stand better. But the fun line is e4. Can I remember the fun line? And then f4. What am I missing? What am I thinking? And black's, oh yeah, black sacrifices a piece and plays here, and white plays here, and the idea is if black tries to force things here, he's going to lose way too much material for a queen. So instead of that, black maybe retreats, for example, and then white can play this move to stop f5. It's a wonderful line. It goes on and on and on. And then black's going to play queen h4 check at some point and try to attack the center. I remember that at one point, theory gives white this big advantage, but black can keep attacking because he can play this move knight c6, and if white takes it, all of a sudden all the pieces come out. So you might want to look into this. There isn't much theory on it, and the theory that's there is incorrect. So it can be a lot of fun for both sides, this kind of position. That's the snake. That's probably has nothing to do with what the comment was about, but anyway, I think it's kind of fun anyway. I'm not quite sure what the comment was about with respect to the Albin. Against the Albin Countergambit, and I'm going to close with this. against the Albin Countergambit, we have, okay, so this is the, sorry, what am I doing? Let's go back. This is the Albin Countergambit. And Eric and I suggest a move we've suggested now for 30 or 40 years that I think is really very, very strong. I just don't think black can come close to equalizing against this move order, but that's just our opinion. Probably the most popular line for black is to kind of sneak over here, but if you look at the theory even, not just our analysis, but the theory, it's looking awfully good for white. Okay, folks, this has been a lot of fun. I want to remind you that you can, for those of you who haven't understood these mysterious references to Twitter, that you can Twitter the hashtag AskIamWatson, AskImWatson, and leave your questions there. So you can think about your questions for a long time. You can split them into a couple tweets and ask a complicated question. And I will try to get to as many of those as I can starting next week. And if they sit around for a week, that's fine because I can still answer them later. And as I say, you can also message me. So send me a message. I hope I didn't say a tell. Send a message to John L. Watson. That's my ICC handle. And I'll try to remember to look into that and include that on the show. So there's various ways to do this. And I really appreciate everybody coming and hope to see you next week. Thanks very much.